Well, hello. My name is Zachary Brooks from World Transplant Athletes. If you have a body with a new part, you are a World Transplant Athlete. You can follow us at World Transplant Athletes all over the web, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, and your social media platform of choice. Also, worldtransplantathletes.org is up and running. We're getting some other things built behind the scenes, but that's coming up very, very soon for us. We have a team of 18 organ recipient transplant athletes from 11 countries who speak 6 languages, working behind the scenes to make content for you, fellow recipients, anywhere you are. Today, we're doing a podcast called Friends of World Transplant Athletes to celebrate and support groups anywhere and everywhere. They're either led by an organ transplant recipient or have recipients as their primary focus. And there's really no better person to talk to than Denise Redeker, who we get to talk to today. She's from the United States. She has a heart transplant, and she runs the Heartfelt Help Foundation, who helps ensure that patients post-transplant have access to affordable transplant housing. Denise, it's really cool to have you on this podcast today. Welcome.
Hey, Zach, how are you?
Very well. So the first questions to kind of warm up me and you and the audience to get to know you a little bit is where you're from and which transplant did you have? And you can talk about that transplant a little bit.
I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area of California, and I received a new heart on January 31st, technically January 31st, 30th into the 31st of 2018.
Okay, excellent. What was the underlying condition that led you to have this amazing experience, which is a heart transplant?
I was diagnosed with postpartum cardiomyopathy when I was 29 years old.
Postpartum, what's the rest?
Cardiomyopathy.
So something to do with heart. So was it a genetic thing or was it triggered by something?
Actually, we don't know the answer to that question. I have a interesting backstory that I'm not sure many people have. I was actually diagnosed by my father-in-law. My father-in-law was one of the world's leading liver physicians and worked with Tom Starzl in liver transplant. Um, and I had just given birth to my son, and he had walked in to meet his new grandson. And as physicians do, he looked up at my EKG monitor, stepped out of the room without saying a word, and called the on-call doctor, and requested that the on-call cardiologist come into my room right away. He had seen something that was off, and knew that something needed to be done right away. So if it weren't for my father-in-law, I probably wouldn't be here today.
Well, what's his first name?
Alan Redeker, Dr.
Oh,
Alan Redeker. He passed a year ago, but we
okay.
miss
Well,
him every day, and I am grateful to him for saving my life.
well, Dr. Alan Redeker, thank you. You know, you're out there somewhere, so thank you so much. What a cool story. Thanks for sharing that, Denise. So then let's get to, and I think this is going to fuse from the story you're telling now into the foundation, but tell us a little bit about your organization, Heartfelt Help Foundation. Tell us a little bit about that.
It's a mouthful, isn't it?
It's a beautiful mouthful. So,
It is. Well, it was started, the germination of the idea started in 2019, in the fall of 2019. I happened to be in clinic for a post-transplant visit and overheard a conversation about a patient that was currently inpatient waiting for his new heart and was going to be pushed down the list because he didn't have the funding for the medically required post-transplant housing. Heart transplant patients are required to relocate. If they don't live within about 15 minutes of their transplant hospital in the Bay Area, they are required to relocate for somewhere between 6 weeks and 3 or 4 months, depending on how complex their post-transplant care is. So upon initial discharge, they are moving into a hotel or an apartment or something similar to that to stay close to the hotel. In my personal situation, I live about 3 hours north of my transplant hospital, and we had to move to within a few minutes of our transplant hospital. It cost us a fortune to do that. So I have personal experience,
Mhm.
and I'm privileged enough that
That
with
you
having
had the fortune, you
family
had
that
the
that
fortune to
I
pay for that. Yeah.
exactly that, and that is nothing short of a privileged status. And when
Mhm.
I overheard this conversation in 2019, I just kind of interrupted. I probably shouldn't have overheard the conversation in the first place, but I interrupted and said, "That's just dumb. I can't stand the fact that something as solvable as money is keeping this person, whoever this person is, from getting a second chance, from having their life-saving transplant." And so I said, "I'm going to do something about it." And they just kind of were like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, whatever. You're going to do something about it." And I went home, and they didn't know me well enough then. I went home and threw
Yeah.
a fundraiser in my backyard using the hospital's 501(c)(3, and we raised the funds for that particular patient's post-transplant housing.
Wait, back up. I was listening, but I didn't catch all of it. So they didn't know you. Like, they don't know what kind of woman, person you are. Who, when she gets upset with something, she really goes to work at it. But so you immediately went home and went to your backyard. And what did you do again?
We had threw a small fundraiser in our backyard. I
Oh,
invited my friends and neighbors and community over. I had some friends that ran small businesses, and they all agreed to donate a percentage of whatever they sold to this fundraiser. I used the hospital's 501(c)(3, so that it would be tax deductible. And we raised enough money for this patient to pay for their post-transplant housing. And that was kind of the germination. That was fall of 2019. And I sat down with my family over the Christmas holidays and said, "I think I want to do this. I think this is what I'm supposed to be doing." I knew after my own transplant, I felt called to do something for transplant patients, but I
yeah,
didn't quite know what it was.
yeah.
And I thought, I said to them, "I think this is what it is." And so we filed for our 501(c)(3 after the first of the year, and then the world shut down in 20 that was 2020, and the world shut down because of COVID. And
Mhm.
I thought, well, that was a great idea. The government's got way bigger fish to fry than process this little 501(c)(3 application.
Right.
And but they did, and we got it back in fall of 2020, and we hit the ground running. We had done all of our due diligence in anticipation that it was going to come. We had kind of set up the structure of how we wanted the nonprofit to run, what we wanted to help people with, and what we couldn't. We made decisions about where
Yeah.
our scope was going to begin and end,
Mhm.
and at least for now, until we get more funding, and set all of that into place so that we could hit the ground running when and if our application ever got approved. And in fall of 2020, it got approved, and we hit the ground running. And we are in the process of helping our 30th patient right now.
Wow.
And
38 patients. Wow.
we're either paying all or a significant part, whatever their insurance. If they have insurance that covers a little bit of their post-transplant housing, we pick up the balance. So either all or part of their post-transplant housing has been covered by our amazing donors.
Yeah, I mean, I after my first transplant, actually in the Bay Area, not probably far from where you are, Stanford in particular, my family and I needed post-transplant housing, and in this case, a kidney. I had a complication after the surgery. The surgery went extremely well, but suddenly there was a complication which forced another operation. I had to be there in the hospital for another 3 weeks, and we had to be at the post-transplant housing for another 2 weeks. And so I know how critical it was for me and the family to be there so we could get quick access back to the clinic on a
Mm-hmm.
very frequent basis. So what you're doing creates a lot of peace and mind for not just the recipient, but everyone around him or her, because this is a family, family, friends, and community affair anytime someone has a transplant. So you guys are doing amazing work. So in terms of timing, I mean, your life has changed remarkably. So 2018, you received a transplant. A year and a half later, you started unofficially Heartfelt Help Foundation, right? And then fast forward a little bit, you're now 2 years officially having run this foundation. Is that accurate in terms of timing?
Yep.
Okay, fantastic. So, you kind of shared already the main message. That's usually one of my questions about this, but I think what I'd love if you could share, because I think it could bring a story home for a lot of people watching this, is what are you working on today?
Well, just to expound a little bit on our mission, I will tell you a
Okay.
story about today.
Okay. Go ahead.
Is that a lot of times hospitals have transplant houses, or they have houses for patients, whether they're oncology patients or transplant patients, and they share a space. And they operate on what I like to call the Ronald McDonald model of post-transplant housing, which is great. It's a wonderful organization, but there's some limitations to it.
So tell us,
And
what is that model, since you
so
brought it up?
that model involves a like an apartment style housing situation, but there are each patient gets their own bedroom and potentially bathroom, most cases bathroom too. But if they want to make a snack, they're going to a communal kitchen. If they want to watch a movie, they're going to a communal living room.
Mhm.
And as we all know, as transplant patients, when you are initially discharged from the hospital, you are at your most immunosuppressed. It is the most it is of the utmost importance during that critical initial stage to stay within your bubble. We all learned the word bubble, keeping your bubble safe during COVID times, and during the height of COVID. We're not out of COVID yet. During the
Mhm.
height of COVID, and keeping your bubble and keeping your area safe is really critical for transplant patients. It's of the utmost importance. They hammer it home to you when you're initially discharged from the hospital that you need to be safe. You can't be around sick people. You need to be around people that are taking your immunosuppression as seriously as you are. And in these communal living situations, that's not always possible. And so our model that we work with is we partner with short-term apartment style or
Mhm.
short-term apartment leasing companies,
Mhm.
and we also work with suite style hotels. And that way we're putting patients in their own individual spaces that have their own kitchens, that have their own living rooms, that have their own bedrooms, because every person's situation is unique. The other issue with a lot of transplant houses is that the patient is allowed to bring in one singular caregiver, and that's it. And a lot of times that's not people's family situation.
Yeah.
We've kind of gone past the era of a nuclear family with a mom and a dad and a kid, or a husband and a wife. A lot of times patient caregivers are a cousin or their parent, or whoever, a friend who's coming along for this adventure. And so having, or they're swapping out because there are two people that are just keeping themselves particularly safe and isolated so that they can swap off care so that one caregiver can go back to work while the other caregiver kicks in, or something. Every situation, every family is unique, and so we set up housing situations that we like to say, we want patients to begin their initial phase of recovery in a place that feels like home with the
Oh,
people who feel like home.
yeah, that's good. So just to back up so I understand, so the Ronald McDonald model works very well. Um, but the biggest problem is that, people are immunosuppressed and they really need to be in their own space. And so what you've done is really tried to create a home vibe with the people included, um, to initiate the post-recovery process, which is kind of really when it begins oftentimes. Certainly in the hospital, you can get better, but you don't really begin recovering until you're in a home environment. So
Precisely.
yeah, wow, that's fantastic. I'm glad you made sure to share all that, because it's things I wouldn't have known or thought about. Maybe these are things you've learned along the way. So, if you can though, because you were right before we started, you were saying, "I have this thing today," and you didn't tell me what, and I
Yeah.
don't know what it is either. And maybe you could talk about what you're working on today to give some real context and meaning to people who are going to watch this either today or sometime in the future.
Well, today we have a new patient that came to us. It's a pediatric patient who just received a heart and liver, and the patient is having the young adult is having multiple complications. and is still inpatient in the hospital. I can't go into a ton of details, but the patient is having many complications, is in pain, as I think we all can relate to as transplant patients. The pain that is post-transplant is not fun, and when you're a kid, it's really hard to understand, I think. So this particular family, because of the complex situation, had been rejected by a couple other hospitals before Stanford took them.
Mm-hmm.
And so they have expended all of their personal funds that they have available. They went back east to a children's hospital back east and had to stay there for a workup before they were rejected. They had been rejected by other hospitals. They finally were accepted by a hospital up here in Northern California, and they are currently paying out of pocket while their child is hospitalized. They're paying out of pocket for hotels and Ubers because they don't have a car here. So they're Ubering back and forth to the hospital. They're paying for hotels, and they have tapped into their 401k. They've expended all their savings. They don't have
Yeah.
any more because of all the complications that have gone into getting their child to this point,
Mm-hmm.
which is post-transplant. Their insurance actually covers post-transplant housing. So we're not being asked to step in to help with that, but what we're stepping in to help with is to make sure that this family is set up well to care
Wow.
for their child when their child gets out of the hospital by giving them a shower and a kitchenette
Yeah.
and a bed, a real bed to sleep in, because they've been sleeping in a chair for months now.
Wow. Yeah, so just for context, if there's anyone watching from Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, or any place in the world where you have a different healthcare system, where obviously you have a different healthcare system in the United States, this kind of story that might sound striking and awful is actually fairly usual, where someone who is going through a major medical problem undergoes during and then subsequently major financial hardships. I mean, I've been through that myself personally, so I know exactly
Yeah.
what that is like, and it definitely is extremely hard on the patient, the family, and so forth. So what you're really doing, just for listeners, what Denise and her group are doing are coming in with like a real stopgap measure at one level, but trying to elevate them to some dignity as humans. So just some context for any international listeners and viewers right now, that this is a very strange system in the United States, and so it takes people like Denise and her foundation to come in and say, here is a resource for you at this very critical junction. So anyway, just a little context. What of all of these stories that you've been through, because I imagine every time you get a new group, it's this kind of download of human emotions and humanity and story and so forth. What's kind of, if you have to say, what's the through line in all of this for you and the foundation folks when you're working with each individual family?
Um, that's a really good question. I don't think anybody's ever asked me that question.
Oh, well,
I
well
think that I think the through line is compassion.
okay.
Um, I think that there is a piece of the puzzle, and I will say that this is probably similar all over the world, is that there's a piece of a puzzle that's missing in this whole transplant process, is that wherever you are, you have this medical team that is taking care of you. You have social workers that are coming in and taking care of you. But a lot of times what you need is a person who's been there and done that. You need a person who's on the other side of
Hmm.
the the midst of the fire
Adventure.
that you're in now, and this
Hmm.
adventure of transplant that you're in the middle of now. You need to chat with somebody who's on the other side that can give you the help and the hope. One of our patients actually said that to me a couple of months ago, was that you gave us help and hope. And that, I think, in a nutshell, is what we're trying to do. Is and it wasn't really what I intended to do necessarily, but I really just wanted to provide some financial help to these patients. But what I realized that people needed, and then I remembered that it was what I needed when I went through my own transplant. I needed somebody who understood, all these toxic medications that we have to take to keep ourselves alive. I understood, I needed somebody to understand how hard it is sometimes, and that it's not just like all sunshine and rainbows. Even on the other side of transplant, I needed somebody to understand that, but also give me the hope that the intense struggle that is the initial post-transplant life isn't going to be your always.
Yeah.
That there's something on the other side of that. And so I think compassion, help, and hope is kind of where our through line is for every single patient, is just to be there for them in whatever context they need us to be there. A lot of times it's emotional support. We've had patients where they ended up finding donated housing on their own, and they didn't use us for housing, but I get calls from them still to this day, just as a sound,
Yeah.
yes, just to be a sounding board, just to say, is this normal? I'm having this reaction, my hands are still shaking from the tacrolimus, whatever. Is this normal from, and yes, they can go see their, and they should talk to their team about it, but talking to someone who's also on the same medication is super helpful, and is a gift that I needed that I didn't have. And so we want to be that person for everybody else.
Great. Thank you. So compassion, help, and hope. Wow. I think we could probably talk forever, Denise, because the stories that you could share are just remarkable. But thanks for spending some time with us today. Really, really appreciate that. Um,
Absolutely.
so thanks everyone for watching. Again, this is World Transplant Athletes. If you have a body with a new part, you are a World Transplant Athlete. Denise, thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.